All right, well, welcome to Knowing Jesus Week 26 Deep Dive, looking at this interaction that Jesus has with a man named Zacchaeus. So if you grew up in church, you grew up knowing that song that we, all know and love. I think, Terry, you led us in a chorus of it this weekend.
We got to sing it. Why not sing it? I mean, went really old school this past weekend. That's the way to do it.
Sang Zacchaeus, used the flannel graph. Awesome. Well, hey, Terry, how are you doing? Ben preached last week,
good.
So it's been a couple weeks.
It has been. I got caught up and do some other things, and it's great. But great to be back. I love this story. This is, I think, such a profound story. There's so much richness and depth in kind of the simple Sunday school story and taking it deeper, where we all are Zacchaeus. We're all short on something, so we can all identify with him.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good line. We are short on something. For Zacchaeus, short on height, short on
friends, short on reputation. Yeah, short on a lot of things.
Yeah, no, awesome. So we'll dive into this passage here. I did want to ask you, though, so how, even in is what I found now, it's a 32-week, or I guess we're extending it a couple weeks, this series, you can't include everything. So, what was the process for you like in choosing certain passages over other passages?
Yeah, I mean, if I had my way, we would probably be taking 3 years to go through. So it is a challenge to kind of boil it down. And, at one time we looked at doing 52 weeks, kind of doing a whole year. But I think knowing that in a year you've got Christmas with the birth and you've got, the death and resurrection with Easter, you're going back and forth. So we thought, let's start when we can end with the cross in mind. So trying to look at the highlight. And so, we looked at kind of how Jesus, his birth and his preparation, and then kind of the first year, kind of his inaugural ministry, which is really one by one, person by person. He moves then into a real period of popularity and looking at some of the things that brought him popularity and what was happening and things he was doing. And then moving into this last 6 months. And, when you look at the scope of what the scripture teaches, so much, a good chunk of the Gospels really focuses on these last 6 months and then the last week. So trying to focus there. And we see Jesus, the next 3 weeks, he's still hugely popular. I mean, obviously you got Zacchaeus and others looking, even though in certain parts of Israel he's hated, in these last 6 months he's in hiding, really. So it was just trying to tell that whole story and kind of the phases of his ministry and what he went through. Obviously, a lot of the teaching, the parables we missed. We really looked on his interactions and encounters with people. What did he do and experience? And trying to picture, okay, if I'm living in Israel at the time, how would I be experiencing Jesus? What would be going on around me?
Well, and even I just think you think about cancel culture. I mean, we're not going to be there yet, but the radical change from his triumphal entry to death on the cross and being tried, like the tale of two crowds, if you will. Well, cool. So in this passage, Jesus, he comes across a tax collector, man by the name of Zacchaeus. We've talked a little bit about tax collectors in these deep dives in the past, but if you could just give us a little bit of a background, what is the significance of Zacchaeus being the tax collector? Yeah,
in Luke's gospel, Zacchaeus is the sixth tax collector we kind of come across. So they do play a significant point. We don't always know all their names, but the sixth time that they come across. Zacchaeus is a little different. He is the chief tax collector. So he's uber rich, uber kind of powerful, and
it's making it rain.
Oh, okay.
I know, you're
some
looking at me
signal
like,
I'm
what are you
talking
doing?
about? What am I? Yeah, that's right. So the chief, he would oversee taxation in an area, and they were taxed for everything. There was a poll tax if you were a person, income tax, fish tax, a barley tax, a road tax, bridge tax. So he would then I mean, this is multi-level marketing in its inception. He would then hire, or people would contract with him to pay so much tax for income, so much for poll, so much for whatever, and they would go and, get the taxes. So he would be the one that would, get all the profits off these other people and then pay a certain percent to Rome. What we don't think about is Jericho was probably the richest of cities. It was beautiful. It was kind of the Palm Desert. It's the place that everybody wanted to be. Summer homes, the rich and elite would go there, the climate, the amenities of the place. So if you're going to tax somewhere, I mean, you want to tax people who have money. And so he is probably one of the richest people we meet in the New Testament, and goes from one of the greediest to the most generous in an afternoon.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
So in this first verse, so chapter 19, verse 1, Jesus, he entered Jericho. He was passing through. So
Right.
wasn't planning to stay in Jericho, just kind of was intending to kind of pass through. Jericho, so again, now we're talking Sunday school. Like,
Right.
we know something about Jericho.
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
do we
it
know
was
about
the
Jericho?
first place that Israel entered when Joshua led them into the promised land. So it's the place that they came in. It was, the walls came down. It was a powerful fortress, and you have Rahab there, whose heart was really open to what Jesus had. And Rahab, in Jericho, is one of Jesus' great grandmothers. So Jesus has roots here in Israel and in Jericho and the people who were there. And so I can imagine you can still see some walls that are down in Jericho today. So who knows what Jesus was thinking as he's come through. And he's he's healed a blind man, Bartimaeus, on the side of the road. He's healed him. He's just talked to the disciples too about little children, and don't keep little children from me. Don't be a hindrance to anyone. I mean, this is kind of an interplay in the scripture. He's always said, don't hinder anyone from coming to me. And so, of course, Zacchaeus experiences that.
Yeah. So verse 2, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. And of course, scriptural, Zacchaeus was a wee little man. Little man was he. He was a chief tax collector.
Right.
And was rich. So if chief tax collector doesn't say it, Luke wants to make sure that we know Zacchaeus was rich.
Right. And I think this is so important because often we look at, and Jesus does often, the widow, the orphan, the marginalized. He spends a lot of time caring for the marginalized. Here is an experience where he meets someone at complete opposite end of the social spectrum. And there's a sense of intentionality. Jesus, you get the sense he came to Jericho just for Zacchaeus. Yeah. And then obviously his height issue, that he was short, small in stature, vertically challenged.
There's climbing trees though,
which is just a whole fascinating, because that's not something a billionaire would do. No. Billionaires don't climb trees, right? They don't have that kind of, you would just never do that. Same as the prodigal father who runs, a rich man would never pull up his garments and run. And so Zacchaeus is so hungry to see Jesus. There's all sorts of commentators and speculation too on just what was Zacchaeus's height issue. If you look at the height of doors in ancient Israel, they were not super high. So people were typically on the shorter side than they are today. So for him to be short, he was really short. So there's all sorts of, was it a medical condition? Was that considered kind of a disability? Was he marginalized because of his height? There had to be something, obviously money is one, but to be a tax collector and the chief tax collector, you have sold out on everything that had value to you. You had rejected your family, you'd rejected your religion, you rejected your community and people. You wouldn't be able to go to the temple, you couldn't be in court, law really didn't recognize you as someone unique or special. So he had sold his soul. Why would he do that? And some, speculate that perhaps his shortness, a disability, may have caused him to experience a lot of rejection on behalf of people.
That's good. So anyway, verse 3, and he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowds, he could not. So again, we see the crowd used as kind of this vice, this entity that is keeping someone from Jesus, or keeping Jesus from, mission.
Yeah, and you can imagine this is one of the only times they probably have to get back at Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus has power.
Oh, yeah.
He's the power broker. This is just one way, crowding in, which we all do. We all want to be at the front of the line, and they just refuse to kind of let him through. And I have to say, as I said this week, it was the crowd that really struck out to me as I'm studying this passage this time. And how much does the crowd keep people from Jesus? And what do we do to keep people from Jesus? How much are we like the crowd, and what is it? I've just been really challenged by that through this week's kind of study. And I think there's, and we see more and more in the news and in the media, particularly if you read a lot of Christian media, about Christian kind of celebrities or leaders or pastors who have fallen and made, moral failures, and who have made huge mistakes, and how hard that is for people around them. And, what does that do to the gospel? And, what is it that we do unintentionally that keeps people away? And I think, as I said, we judge people too much on whether they believe us or whether we believe the same, instead of, centering on our brokenness, coming together around our brokenness and bringing our common brokenness to Jesus. And, here we see, I think the cancel culture is nothing new. And, here's the cancel culture. This crowd had canceled Zacchaeus out. They're like, we're not giving you anything. We are completely rejecting. And obviously they had reason, but they were more focused on what they didn't believe or what they didn't hold in value together, as they were in the fact they were all broken. And we all have sinful condition and brokenness together. And coming together around that, what made Zacchaeus, what made the crowd. And so I just think, what is it in our life that doesn't point people to Jesus, that points people to ourselves or to our pride or arrogance? And so to me, that was just the real challenge. What is it we do in churches? What do churches do? How do we operate, that actually keep people away, instead of providing an opportunity for people to really come and hear Jesus and see Jesus and meet Jesus, the Jesus in us?
Yeah, that there's a difference, right? When you think of the word crowd, or even the verb, right? The difference between crowding in and crowding out.
Yeah.
Right? Like crowding in because there's something compelling you want to see, versus crowding out, you're keeping someone else from that same thing.
Right.
That's anyway, that's an interesting image. I don't think I've ever thought of that when it comes to this passage. I think of the crowd in the passages where the paralytic is brought by his friends.
Right.
And, there's this idea of like something's happening, Jesus is there, and there's such a crowd, and there's just no room for them to get in because there's something that's so compelling that's being seen. And here, though, with Zacchaeus, especially knowing that he's a chief tax collector,
right?
There probably was some intentional keeping Zacchaeus out. And one of the questions that I'm always wrestling with as I read especially New Testament narrative is like, who am I in this story, right?
Right.
Who do I identify with? And it's it's not Jesus, right? I'm not the Christ. And so in this one, it's probably Zacchaeus in many ways. But it's also the crowd, and I think that's a good connection point.
And I think I've often looked at the from, okay, how am I Zacchaeus? How are people Zacchaeus? Preach it like, are we Zacchaeus? And it was like this time, it was like, oh yeah, sometimes we're more the crowd. How is the church the crowd? Who is it that we're keeping out? And I think, who would it be that you would get up and walk out of church if they walked in? And I'm sure there's probably someone that we all have. It's like, man, if they're coming to church, there's such animosity, something in our heart toward them, we would walk out. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I wanna riff on that for a minute, because I do think that, especially in this passage, towards the end, and we'll get there in a little bit. It describes Zacchaeus as also a son of Abraham, right? And
Right.
so, like, sometimes I think the person that we crowd out is someone who is an insider to be, already, like, they are part of the church. They're part of the people of God. We are in a spiritual community with, and yet we can isolate, we can push, we can keep others from Jesus, even within our own community. And that's devastating. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, get to what Jesus does, there's more in common than what was different. And, obviously we focus on the differences as opposed to our common brokenness. And, I think that's what we're going to see. Jesus sees this guy up a tree. He knows in a couple months he's going to be hanging on a tree. They've got common brokenness. Yeah. And I think that's part of what they talked about at dinner, whatever they talked about.
So on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small in stature. Again, we don't know how tall he was, don't know, why he was small, but verse 4, so he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him. So Zacchaeus, he ran on ahead. Again, someone of wealth, you wouldn't see them running, but he runs ahead to get out ahead. He climbs up into a sycamore tree, to see Jesus, for Jesus was about to pass away. I can't read this and not hear the song.
I know.
And when Jesus came to that place, he looked up and he said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today.
And I love it. It's just, again, this may be the only time someone actually ever looked up at Zacchaeus. Right? Everybody looked down on him, like metaphorically and physically. And it's like someone looked. I don't know how profound that would be for Zacchaeus to see Jesus in a different stance, and in a metaphorical stance. But Jesus stopped, he looked, and he invited. And the word "must" there, you must come down, is the same word Jesus uses in John for to talk about going to the Samaria, when we talked earlier on, where he had to go meet the Samaritan woman. He says, no, we must go. We've got to go through Samaria. It's one of the few times that word is used. And there's this intentionality that there's a point of destiny, that there was a particular meeting that Jesus had that day with Zacchaeus and wanted him to come down and meet with him and stay, with him.
Yeah, that divine necessity, Jesus bringing salvation to Zacchaeus' home. Oh, man, that's really good. And he names him, right? He also calls him by name. Yeah. So he sees him, he names him.
And Zacchaeus means pure one. So, here is Jesus, and the crowd has kept him out. Jesus sees who he could be. Jesus sees who he could be with a new heart, with a heart of flesh, not a heart of stone, what he could be.
Well, and you wonder the tone that Jesus used even in saying Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus' name was probably associated with stealing, with jealousy, with this, that, or the other, and you just wonder the tone that Jesus used even in saying Zacchaeus. So Zacchaeus, hurry, come down. I must stay at your house today. So he hurried. So Zacchaeus, he hurried, he came down and received him joyfully. So this is an interesting, thing. Zacchaeus, he accepts the invitation. Jesus invites himself to Zacchaeus' home. Zacchaeus accepts the invitation to have a house guest, and there is a joyfulness, and then this is going to be juxtaposed with the crowd again, because in verse 7, when they all saw it, they all grumbled, or when they saw it, they all grumbled. And they said, he has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner.
Right. And I love it. It's so funny. I mean, this to me is the almost the punchline of the story, because they're grumbling about Jesus meeting him, but they're not going to be grumbling when they get their money back, right? Jesus is their biggest windfall, right? that what they're grumbling about is going to be actually their great blessing. And it makes it, what is it that we grumble about, complain? What's God doing? Why is God doing that? Why is he with them? Why is he helping them? Maybe the thing we're grumbling about is God setting us up for some blessing. And, that's what I think. They're all grumbling, but they don't realize what's going to happen, how that's going to be so life-changing, not just for Zacchaeus, but for them.
Yeah, well, and crazy because they recognize, hey, this dude's no good, right? He is a sinner.
Right.
He has hurt us. And I don't know, I think sometimes, and this is weird, right? The human condition of it's hard for us to celebrate, I think, other people. We almost want to put more stipulations, requirements for a person to receive grace. I was listening to a pastor one time talk about, what was it? I think it was Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah.
And how, the horrific crimes, right, that he committed. And yet when he was in prison, a man faithfully met with him and led him to the Lord. I think I'm getting that story right.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
The pastor said something that was pretty poignant after, and it was if you have a problem with that story, then you don't understand the grace of Jesus.
Right.
That Jeffrey Dahmer is going to be spending eternity in the presence of Jesus. Anyway, it was a convicting thing for me, because I'm like, oh man, that's right. And for whatever reason, sometimes we want to, like I said, put these stipulations, these requirements before the people. Oh, you have to.
And I think we have to remember Zacchaeus was probably in that Jeffrey Dahmer camp. We think of Zacchaeus, he's, kind of a little corrupt IRS agent.
Yeah, he's a short little caricature. Yeah.
But he was really the power broker of the day. He's the mafioso. Everybody kind of feared and hated. And Jesus goes after him. Jesus goes to the weak and the vulnerable, but he also goes to those who are, lording their power and abusing their power. So I appreciate that he is doing that and meeting all sorts of people. And I think sometimes we love certain conversion stories when they're all neatly tied up. Mm-hmm. We see here when the crowd is grumbling, and this is a conversion story that's still messy. And Jesus is at work, and the in-between is really hard for us. And I think a lot of times we're in the in-between. We are called to walk with the Zacchaeuses in between Jesus' call and their conversion. And that's messy, messy stuff, and we would rather just avoid it. But here is, Jesus, he's willing to walk, grumble away, people. But I've got a plan. It's not going to always be this way. And we've got to, sometimes people are toxic and we've got to kind of step back, but sometimes we need a lot of grace and patience to work and walk alongside people in the messiness of their conversion experience. I mean, Zacchaeus hadn't changed yet. He hadn't given anybody back. He hadn't given his heart to Jesus. Jesus saw something in him. He saw a heart for him and an eagerness. But he said, I'm willing to meet with you. I'm willing to be in community with you. I'm willing to connect with you. Because to eat, this is the most intimate, really, of things. This is true fellowship in that sense. And the word, kind of come to your house, be at your house. There's several different understandings of what that could be, and some suggest what Jesus is doing is saying, hey, I'm passing through, but I got to stay overnight. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I'm just spending it. Can I spend the night? Can I be an overnight guest? We don't know whether it's just an afternoon, was an evening, how long he was there. We have no idea. But there's a sense of this, for Jesus to do this was incredible acceptance of Zacchaeus. This wasn't like, oh, I'm staying at the nicest, B&B in town. This is, we're in community. And I think that's part of what changed that relationship. It's part of what we said. A relationship with Jesus changes us so that it changes the people around us. And, here was Jesus. Zacchaeus didn't have to believe before Jesus would come to him. Jesus said, "You belong. We're together." And out of that sense of belonging and community, Zacchaeus changed.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said too about I don't know if it's. I think we see this in the Gospel of Luke. We certainly see it all through the Old Testament and into the New Testament as well. But the presence of God, the presence of Jesus, even here, in Luke, the temple, right, is featured prominently in some of the earlier stories in the book of Luke. The temple association with the presence of God throughout the Old Testament, and with Jesus, like I do wonder too, this idea of him coming and staying with Zacchaeus. There's something to be said, I think, about the dwelling place of the Lord and the relationship that initiates for his people.
For sure.
Okay, so then in verse 8, and Zacchaeus stood, and he said to the Lord, "Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold."
Right.
So there's this idea, these reparations that he's going to make. And I do want to ask, that salvation, there's nothing, I mean, salvation is something that God does, that's something that Jesus does for us, right? We don't earn salvation. Right. But yet Zacchaeus is doing something here. It almost, and it seems like from his own accord. We see other stories, right? The rich young ruler, Jesus tells him to go, and he can't. And Zacchaeus, he just does. So I don't know. Seems to be something there.
Yeah, I mean, it's who knows what moved. I mean, you see, as a son of Abraham, there was a sense of reparation. If you acknowledge that you have stolen something, taken something that really wasn't yours, the book of Numbers suggested you return it plus 20%. If you stole a sheep, Exodus 22, I think, says you pay back 4 times. So there's actually, throughout the Old Testament law, there were a number of different, some things you doubled, some you tripled. So there wasn't a standard, how much you paid back.
Yeah.
But there was something in his connection with the law, something that he did that. And I as I said on this week, I think he looks into Jesus' eyes and sees the Zacchaeus he could be.
Yeah.
And see, I think that's part of, looking to Jesus to see the Jesus we could be. The Terry, Jesus is going to show me the Terry I can be, the Brad that I can be. And I think he knew that the hurt, the pain that he caused people, he couldn't become who Jesus had without some sort of offering to people. And Jesus had accepted him. There's salvation. We don't earn it, but sometimes we live it out. Sometimes we, because of the changed heart, I think this is the key, is the changed heart, want to give to people. And, I do think there's always something in forgiveness, that the circle of offense is the circle of confession. If we have offended someone, if we've done something, we need to go and confess. We need to make it right, take care of it, deal with that. And so I think we see that here, that this is what Zacchaeus does. He knows he can't have the same fellowship with Jesus. He can't continue that same, he can't become who Jesus sees him becoming without making it right to other people. You can't go and say, well, I'm new in Jesus, but not somehow go back to people and say, hey, I need to make it right. And that's part of repentance. And I think when that happens, revival happens, something powerful happens.
Yeah, the communal nature, I think, of both our sin, but also our participation in the redemption work that Jesus is doing. Right? Like, how can Zacchaeus truly fully be in Christ if he can't be in relationship with those that are also in Christ? I mean, that is for sure. And then Jesus ends, he says, today salvation has come to this house, since he is also a son of Abraham. And I'm sure he's probably talking ethnicity. He's talking about people of God. He's part of that Jewish faith, but also probably, I think of like the faith of Abraham that's in scope in Romans and Galatians. And there's true belief here. There's justification that comes by.
Yeah, Abraham believed God, and that was credited as righteousness. And I think, I love that. Is we said it's not like, oh, Zacchaeus did all the right things. He tried harder and was better, so God accepted him. Jesus came. It's not, self-help. It's that Jesus completely changed his heart, and we can't do anything unless salvation comes to us. Jesus comes to us.
Yeah, no, it's great. And then, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. Zacchaeus was lost, and in Jesus he is found. Jesus sees him, finds him, names him.
And do we? That's the big, if Christ is in us, then are we seeking the lost and reaching out to them?
That's great.
Yeah.
One last question, and then so it says, Jesus said, "Today salvation has come to this house." This word salvation, it's a Christian word. What do we mean? We hear the phrase like, "Oh, are you saved?" It probably used more 10, 15 years ago than now. But like salvation, what is salvation?
Yeah, the Greek word kind of so it really means kind of a healing in the fullest sense of the word. That we have total spiritual, emotional healing, the possibility of future physical healing, that we are made right and becoming whole, that Jesus makes us a whole person. And, Zacchaeus, who was short on a lot, now becomes a whole person. So,
cool.
Yeah. I like the scripture's so rich. It is so rich, a simple little Sunday school stories, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so real. We're all Zacchaeus. We're all short on something. We're all the crowd. We all need salvation to come to us.
Yeah.
So
that's great.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
For those of you watching, just thank you for joining us. Thanks for tuning in. Invite you to check out our website, calvary.church/knowingjesus, just for all of the additional resources we've put together for this series. We've got a new Finding Jesus coming up later this week or next, so you can check that out when it's here. Previous week's deep dives you can find there as well, or go to our YouTube channel where all of that is uploaded. And while you're there, please subscribe. That helps you get just new content as it becomes available. And we will catch you again next week.
All right. Take care.